Hello and welcome to Cleveland Classic Cinema. Tonight's movie is 1945's Detour, directed by Edgar G. Ulmer. I've been hearing about Detour as a perfect example of film noir for years. Every book that I read about films that featured noir in any way always mentioned it in glowing terms, talking about it as if it were the be-all, end-all of the genre, so I felt a little less trepidation than usual about watching it for the show. After watching it, I did my usual amount of research and came up with article after article written by college students dissecting the emotional and psychological underpinnings and how rear projection techniques were symbolic of the hopelessness inherent to the subject, and a bunch of other nonsense that made me roll my eyes in exasperation before hitting the back button on my computer and turning my attention to less aggravating things like figuring out cold fusion. I've said before that I have no patience with that kind of film discussion. My reaction to movies is more visceral than intellectual, and while I'm sure that intellectual discussion of film has its place, it's not a place you're going to find me hanging around. I want to make that absolutely clear because more than once, although not frequently, thank God, I've had people who have seen the show attempt to pin me down talking about that kind of stuff, even though they know how I feel about it. I can't figure out why they insist on doing that. Incidentally, if you're a fan of B-movies, Cuyahoga Community College is offering a non-credit course examining B-movies of the 50s called Beware, Bad Film Directors from the 50s and Beyond, featuring the films of William Castle, Roger Corman, and Edward D. Wood, Jr. The class starts, appropriately enough, on Friday, October 13th. 12 films by the directors mentioned will be screened, and afterwards there will be discussion about thematic content of the films and the socio-political attitudes of the time. Regular viewers will recognize some of the films being screened as ones they've seen on this very show. I don't know if that says something good for the course or bad for this show. For more information, hop on the web and go to www.tri-c.edu/community/bmovies or call 216-987-3075. All right, I've done my bit for public service. Anyway, Detour certainly does fit the definition of film noir, but with one major difference. The other noir films I've seen have had doomed heroes I actually felt some kind of sympathy for. In Detour, the hero was such a complaining, malcontent dipstick that I spent most of the movie hoping that a safe would fall on his head or something. Anything so I wouldn't have to listen to him complain anymore. The movie sets the tone for this right from the start. All Al Roberts, the nominal hero, does from the beginning is piss and moan about how he's getting screwed by life, how no one appreciates his talent, and blah, blah, blah. He gets tipped $10 by a customer and talks about how it's just a piece of paper crawling with germs. Now keep in mind, this is $10 in 1945 dollars. That was no small amount back then. To make matters worse, about halfway into the movie, he picks up a woman who's even more unpleasant than he is, if you can imagine that. She's one of those hard-boiled dames who talks out of the side of her mouth and never says anything even halfway feminine. Precisely the kind of dame I'd end up having to sit next to on a cross-country bus trip. Now, I'm sure there are viewers in the audience who are no doubt more enlightened than I am as to the deeper meanings inherent in these thoroughly unpleasant characters. Those who would contend that I'm some sort of ignoramus for not seeing how this film addresses the basic hopelessness of the human condition. If you're one of those viewers, go out and get laid, because you really need it. I realize I'm ranting here, but God, I am so sick of whiny, ungrateful malcontents bitching about every little thing that's wrong in their lives and never doing anything about it, that I just feel like reaching out and slapping half the country upside the head. And let me tell you, watching this movie didn't help my outlook one bit. The only thing this movie proved to me is that my parents' generation could be just as whiny as mine. Wow, what a great thing to take away from this experience. I think the thing that upsets me most is that this is supposed to be the best of the low-budget noirs ever made. And if it is, then it's the last one you'll see on this show. You know, I'll forgive a lot of things in a movie. I'll forgive bad acting, insipid dialogue, cheap sets, rotten special effects, moronic props. The list goes on. One thing I absolutely will not forgive is stupid characters. Now, I know film noir pretty much depends on the stupidity or naivete of the protagonist, but in a good noir, you still care for the character in spite of his pea-brain antics. That's not how it is in this movie. The hero is, as I've mentioned before, a whiny malcontent. But in addition to that, he's just so damn stupid that you want to kick the TV in an attempt to knock some sense into his head. Here are a couple of examples, and these are spoilers. So if you want to watch this movie unsullied by the knowledge of what's going to happen next, either mute the TV or go get a sandwich and a soda or something. I'll wait. I've done it before. Okay, spoiler time. Said idiot is hitchhiking his way from New York to California to join his girlfriend, who's moved to Los Angeles. He gets picked up by a rich guy who buys him food as they travel along, and while he's rude and crass, just like everyone else in this movie, he's sort of likable. The guy dies of a heart attack while they're driving along one night, so what does the idiot do? Does he drive to a hospital and have the guy examined? Does he flag down a cop? No. He opens the door and lets the guy tumble out and fracture his skull on a rock. Figuring out the fix he's gotten himself into, what does he do? Does he dump the body and abandon the car after wiping his prints off everything? No! He dumps the body and takes the guy's car and wallet. Does he then get rid of the car and resume hitchhiking once he's safely away from the burial site? No. He picks up the aforementioned hard-boiled dame and lets her blackmail him into one of the stupider plans I've heard formulated in a movie, that being that he'll pose as the dead guy's long-lost son to get his hands on the deceased's money. What does he do then? Does he get the car up to about 90 on a stretch of desert highway and push the hard-boiled tramp out the door? No! He goes to a hotel with her and checks into a room. While they're in the room, they argue and she locks herself in the bedroom with a telephone, threatening to call the cops. So he grabs the phone cord and begins to pull on it. Does he pull it out of the wall like any other normal person with half a brain would do? What? Is that a yes I hear from my legion of loyal viewers? Oh no, so sorry. He tries to pull the phone through the crack in the bottom of the door, unaware that the cord has somehow wrapped itself around the neck of the dame, strangling her to death. At this point, he realizes he's been pretty much screwed by life and gives up, although not soon enough to suit me. Okay, we're back. Turn the TV back up, or settle down with your snack and we'll continue. I'm sure that after hearing the glowing description I've given this film, you're all champing at the bit to see it, but before I go on, let me tell you a bit about a technique used extensively in this movie, rear projection. Rear projection was developed by, and I'm guessing at the pronunciation here, incidentally, Detour, a technician at Paramount Studios in 1933. It was developed as a way to avoid costly location shooting. A camera crew would go out and shoot the background footage, called a plate, and the footage would be projected against the back of a special translucent screen called a rear projection screen, since the image was, of course, projected on it from behind rather than in front of the screen. This required a lot of studio space as the screens were huge and had to be filled from end to end and top to bottom, and the projectors used carbon arc rods for light. What you do is pretty much what we're doing right here. The talent, or in this case me, would stand in front of the rear projection screen, be lit, and the camera would record the image. It didn't always look realistic, but when it was done right, it was hard to tell it was being used. An improvement on the rear projection technique was used in Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey during the Dawn of Man sequence. The background image was front projected in that case. It utilized a screen covered with a special material called Scotchlite, developed by 3M in the late 1940s. You see Scotchlite in use all over the place. The reflective letters on the highway signs are made of Scotchlite, for instance, as is the reflective tape used on clothing in those damn orange barrels and dunce caps you see everywhere. It's made of millions of very small glass balls which are cut in half and adhered to whatever material it's used on. It reflects light back at the source at about 95% intensity and is also used on theater screens and such. Now what Kubrick did was project the background plate onto a two-way mirror set at a 45-degree angle to the Scotchlite screen and place the actor in between the two. The actor was then lit, washing out the image falling on him while his body blocked the shadow he was throwing on the screen behind him. The camera then shot the image through a two-way mirror and captured it on film. It worked amazingly well. The apes in the scene look as if they're really in primordial settings. As I pointed out earlier, we use word projection on this show. That proves it's cheap. Director Edgar G. Ulmer was born on September 17, 1904 in Olmütz, Moravia, Austria-Hungary. It's open to speculation as to how many films he directed in his career. Many of his films are considered lost. He started out as a set designer for Max Reinhardt in Germany and moved on to designing sets for such famous German directors as F.W. Murnau, Fritz Lang, Ernst Lubitsch, and William Detour, working on such films as Die Nibelung, M, and Metropolis. He moved to Hollywood with Murnau and designed the amazing sets for 1927's Sunrise. The first American film he directed was 1934's The Black Cat with Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi, a very strange film for its time. Oddly, this was his last film for a major studio. He moved on to PRC Studios, where he shot tonight's movie and 5 others, then spent the rest of his career finding work wherever he could get it, bouncing back and forth between Europe and America, directing documentaries, exploitation pictures, and what have been called marginal ethnic movies, usually folk and fairy tales. Some of his more well-known films are 1951's The Man from Planet X with Robert Clark, 1957's Daughter of Dr. Jekyll with Gloria Talbot and Arthur Shields, which is a personal favorite of mine, and 1960's The Amazing Transparent Man with no one you'd recognize. Many of his films are worth seeing, and I say this in spite of my feelings about the movie we're showing tonight. Edgar Ulmer died on September 30th, 1972 in Woodland Hills, Los Angeles, California. Tom Neal was born on January 28, 1914 in Evanston, Illinois. He was born into a wealthy family who wanted him to become a lawyer, sending him to Northwestern University, where he studied law in addition to joining the boxing team, where he excelled, being a natural athlete. He was, by all accounts, a charming young man, but had a hair-trigger temper and was prone to intense jealousy. Not exactly a combination you want in someone trained as a boxer. Although he completed his law degree at Harvard, he wanted to be an actor and made his Broadway debut in 1935. 3 years later, he made his screen debut with 1938's Out West with the Hardys. He went on to appear in movies throughout the 40s and 50s, mostly appearing on screen as a tough guy in 81 movies and television shows. He never achieved star status, but became well known for his frequent public outbursts, especially in 1951 when he beat actor Franchot Tone badly for dating his ex, actress Barbara Payton. I've seen Barbara Payton, and believe me, she wasn't worth the beating. He worked Tone over pretty well, fracturing the actor's cheekbone, breaking his nose, and inflicting a concussion. Tone really never recovered from this beating, speaking with a slight slur for the rest of his life, and Neal was blackballed in Hollywood. He found work doing landscaping and in 1965 was brought to trial for the murder of his then-wife, Gail. He served exactly 6 years of a 10-year sentence and died 8 months later of heart failure on August 7, 1972. Ann Savage was born Bernice Maxine Lyon on February 19, 1921 in Columbia, South Carolina. She appeared in 35 films and TV shows, her best remembered role being Vera in Detour. Once she got her start, she played mostly tough cookies throughout her career and made 5 films with Neal. She wound up being typecast and retired in the early 50s, spending her time traveling with her husband, financier Bert Yarmond. When he died in 1969, she was left penniless and worked as a secretary in a law firm to pay off his debts. She appeared in one more film, 1986's Fire with Fire. Today she makes personal appearances all over the country, recounting her experiences in Hollywood and mostly regaling audiences with stories of when she was making Detour. This movie, I just don't know. I'm not often at a loss when it comes to this point in an intro because this is where I usually sum up my feelings about the movie we're showing. I suppose one of the reasons I reacted so badly to it was the constant barrage of reviews telling me how brilliant it was, how it's the ultimate noir. Another thing that puts my back up, the use of a French term to describe something when an English term would do just as well. I mean, noir, for God's sake? I've heard it pronounced no-ear, noir, noir, noor, and nor. Why not just say dark or black or shadowy instead of some arrogant-sounding term that, if you pronounce it incorrectly, makes you sound like an idiot, and if you pronounce it correctly, makes you sound like a snob? Where was I? Oh, yeah. When I was researching this movie, I had to slog through the absolutely maddening, to me anyway, reviews of it written by that bane of true movie makers, film students. I have nothing against film students personally. It's just that after going to film school, most of the ones I've met get this insanely arrogant air about them and start throwing terms like indulgent and the dreaded symbolism around like a field car spreading manure on lettuce plants. The snobbery seems to extend itself to whether or not HD video is a worthy successor to film. I will admit video has a way to go before it completely replaces film, and while I admit I used to think of video as kind of the unwanted bastard child of film, the fact is that the only way 98% of film students will be able to get a project made is to do it on HD video. The feature I just worked on was shot on HD, and it looks so close to film you wouldn't be able to tell if you didn't know beforehand. The reality of the situation is that it's less expensive by much more than half to shoot on HD than it is on film, and it is the wave of the future. You know, I seem to have veered ever so slightly off subject here, so let me sum up. This movie sucked. So right now, sit back, relax, and enjoy Detour, right here on Cleveland Classic Cinema.